Hey guys, tonight we venture to the ancient world's edge, a garden in perpetual twilight, to ponder a surprisingly tedious existence. We're talking about the Hesperides, nymph daughters of evening, and their extremely monotonous apple guarding schedule. Imagine your job is protecting Hera's golden apples of immortality, but your workplace has zero drama. Your main colleague is a hundred-headed dragon who mostly sleeps, and your shift lasts eternity. It's less epic Greek myth and more divine internship with no end date and repetitive tasks. And let's be honest, eternity in a dim garden with only sisters and a sleepy monster. Guarding fruit you can't eat. You probably won't survive this imaginary journey without celestial ennui or trying to teach Ladon to play fetch with a sunbeam. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see our global night owl community. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir, not from a deep sleep. Because true, restorative sleep feels like a luxury reserved for mortals, or perhaps for Zeus after a particularly strenuous day of, shall we say, divine diplomacy. It's more like drifting up from a long, shimmering reverie, a state of being that hovers somewhere between wakefulness and the gentle oblivion of dreams. Your eyes, the color of twilight itself perhaps, a soft violet or a dusky rose, flutter open to the exact same scene that greeted them yesterday, and the day before that, and for countless cycles that have long since blurred into a single, unending moment. This is the Garden of the Hesperides, your home, your workplace, your gilded, ever so slightly boring cage. The Garden of the Hesperides was traditionally placed by ancient poets and mythographers in the far west, at the very edge of the world, near where Atlas strained beneath the weight of the heavens, in a land bathed in the perpetual glow of evening or sunset. No harsh noon sun ever scorches here. No true inky night ever offers a complete reprieve. Just this endless, beautiful, and soul-crushingly predictable gloom. Your internal alarm clock, which you suspect is probably just the faint echo of yesterday's monumental yawn, finally bouncing back from the shimmering, invisible boundary of the garden, has gently nudged you into what passes for morning? Or maybe it's the subtle yet deeply ingrained existential dread kicking in, reminding you that another identical stretch of apple guarding duty awaits. Hard to tell. Some millennia. You stretch languidly on your bed of fragrant, ever-blooming asphodel and soft mosses, feeling the eternal gentle breeze that never quite ruffles your perfectly divine, probably very artfully disheveled, immortal hair. You suspect even Zephyrus, the west wind, when he bothers to pass through, is on a very strict, very boring Hera-approved schedule around here, ensuring no leaf is ever too dramatically disturbed. The air's always cool, carrying the sweet, heavy perfume of unknown, otherworldly flowers that never wilt and never change their scent. It's a lovely perfume, truly. For the first few centuries, it was enchanting. Now it's just the air. The light is a soft, silvery luminescence, as if the sun has just dipped below the horizon and decided to stay there, permanently undecided about whether to fully set or rise again. It casts long, unchanging shadows from the ancient, gnarled olive trees and the strangely luminous apple tree that is the entire point of your existence. You observe a single, unwavering dewdrop, clinging with admirable tenacity to the tip of a silver-green leaf just beyond your resting place. This dewdrop, you've noted with the kind of intense focus only infinite boredom can cultivate, catches the twilight in precisely the same multifaceted way every single time you open your eyes. It's your own tiny, unchanging anchor in this sea of timelessness, a quirky little micro-ritual of observation to mark the transition from one phase of monotonous vigilance to the next. Nearby, you can hear the soft murmur of your sisters, perhaps Aegle or Erithia, or Hesperia, their names like whispered melodies. They too are stirring, or perhaps they never truly rested. Their forms graceful and ethereal. Their beauty is constant and unchanging as the garden itself. You'll exchange the same gentle greetings you exchanged at the last dawn, discuss the same non-events, and perhaps sing one of the same hauntingly beautiful, achingly melancholic songs that are your specialty. Historians still argue whether the Hesperides were viewed by the ancient Greeks primarily as gentle nature spirits, nymphs personifying the ethereal beauty and tranquility of evening and the golden light of sunset, or if their crucial role as dedicated guardians of Hera's divine treasure. However monotonous that duty might have been, imbued them with a more significant, albeit rather passive, cosmic power and authority. Right now, feeling the familiar weight of another identical cycle settling upon you, you're leaning towards glorified fruit security with a really good, albeit repetitive, high choir practice schedule. Another morning in paradise. If paradise came with a non-negotiable, eternity-spanning contract for advanced Apple security, a distinct lack of stimulating new social interactions, and absolutely no prospect of a decent brunch spot ever opening up just beyond the garden's shimmering, impenetrable borders. You sigh a soft, melodious sound that probably harmonizes perfectly with the gentle rustling of the leaves. Time to get up. The apples won't guard themselves. Well, actually, they mostly do. But Hera has rules, and Ladon, your other esteemed colleague, will need his mostly non-existent morning briefing. The eternal twilight yawns before you, beautiful, serene, and utterly, unyieldingly the same. Right then, another cycle of eternal twilight apple guarding has officially commenced with your customary stirring from that not-quite sleep. Before you even think about your own ethereal breakfast of dew-kissed ambrosia and perhaps a single artfully arranged, never-changing blossom, because dietary variety is apparently not on Hera's approved list for immortal nymph guardians. There's the first and arguably most important item on your unwritten, unvarying daily schedule, checking on your primary coworker. Lydon? Yes, Ladon, the hundred-headed, ever-vigilant in theory, Dracon who is tasked with being the main, terrifying deterrent to any would-be Apple aficionados with sticky fingers and a death wish. You drift because trudge implies effort, and you've had millennia to perfect the art of effortless, graceful movement that conserves as much precious ennui as possible towards the heart of the garden where the golden apple tree, Hera's pride and your eternal responsibility, glows with its soft, magical light. Ladon, naturally, is coiled around its base, a living, breathing, multi-headed barricade of scales and slumber. Ladon, the dragon or serpent tasked with guarding the golden apples in the Garden of the Hesperides, was often described in ancient myths as having multiple heads, sometimes as many as 100, each potentially capable of speaking with a different voice, though other accounts depict him as a more straightforward, albeit enormous, serpent. Approaching him is an exercise in supreme anticlimax. You'd think a hundred-headed dragon would make for a rather dramatic encounter, but after the first few centuries, the novelty, much like the gilding on a particularly overused Olympian chariot, tends to wear a bit thin. The air around him carries a faint, not unpleasant, scent. Less sulfurous brimstone, more like ancient sun-warmed rocks, damp earth, and a surprising hint of what you can only describe as very old, very sleepy reptile. As you get closer, you can hear the breathing, a complex symphony of soft rumbles, gentle hisses, and the occasional surprisingly delicate snore, like a tiny kitten trapped in a very large, scaly tuba. Most of his heads, each with its own unique, albeit usually grumpy, expression, are tucked in or resting gently on one of his massive coils. Their eyes, countless pairs of them, ranging in color from molten gold to deep emerald, are almost all closed. Time for the daily dragon wellness check. Pulse probably slow, if dragons even have pulses in the conventional sense. Temperature varies wildly from head to head, especially if head number 37, the one with the perpetually worried frown, has been dreaming of volcanic hot tubs again. Overall condition still a terrifying, multi-headed guardian of priceless fruit, currently achieving peak, gold medal-worthy nap. Your checkup is by necessity and long practice, incredibly cursory. Is he, broadly speaking, still there? Yes, all several tons of him. Is he generally still alive? The gentle cacophony of multi-toned snores would suggest so. Are all heads accounted for and attached? A quick, practice scan confirms this. No heads have inexplicably wandered off during the night to start a solo career in interpretive dance or to form a barbershop nut they're still. 10 short of a decent 100-headed choir. A point of eternal frustration for head number 12 who fancies himself a choir master? Excellent. Duty done. You try to make eye contact with at least a few of his visible heads as a matter of professional courtesy, perhaps offering a serene, nymph-like nod. It's like trying to get the attention of 100 very sleepy, very scaly tenured committee members who've unanimously decided millennia ago that the current agenda item, "Are the apples still here?" is fundamentally pointless because, of course, the apples are still here. Your relationship with Ladon has evolved over the eons from initial mild trepidation, those first few centuries when you worried he might accidentally mistake one of your elegantly draped arms for a particularly juicy tree branch, to a sort of comfortable, distant collegiality based mostly on mutual, unspoken boredom. You and your sisters probably have your own private, whimsical nicknames for some of his more expressive heads. Grumpy Gus for head number 7, the philosopher for head number 22, who sometimes looks deeply contemplative even in sleep, and Snuffles for head number 88, who has a persistent, faint wheeze. One particular head, Curtis 43, a rather small, unassuming one usually tucked near his left primary foreleg, is a notorious sleep talker. It doesn't bellow prophecies or roar threats. Instead, it mutters the most astoundingly mundane, and occasionally surprisingly good, if completely random, advice. Last week it was, always ensure your obsidian blades are sharpened against the grain for optimal zuzz ritual disembowelment of pomegranates. Utterly useless for you, of course, as you have no obsidian blades and a distinct lack of pomegranates. Ritual or otherwise, ma'am, but you appreciated the specificity. It's these tiny, absurd quirks that help to punctuate the otherwise seamless fabric of eternity. Historians still argue whether Ladon, in the grand scheme of Greek mythology, was intended to be perceived as a genuinely terrifying, chaotic monster, a primal force held barely in check at the world's edge, or if his presence was more deeply symbolic, representing the inviolable sanctity of Hera's divine property and the unbreachable boundaries of the known, ordered world, beyond which lies only mystery. Honestly, most days, he seems more like a very large, scaly, and slightly over-engineered paperweight for the apple tree. You sometimes wonder if Layden even remembers why he's stationed here, in this perpetual twilight. His internal monologue, if you had to guess, probably cycles through 3 main thoughts. Are those shiny things still on the tree? Yep. Good. Is anything trying to get the shiny things? Nope. Excellent. Time for another nap, then. Wake me if anything genuinely interesting. Like, say, the sudden invention of a comfortable, cloud-sized dragon pillow that supports all 100 heads equally. Actually happens. So, Ladon is fine. Or, at least, as fine as an immortal. 100-headed dragon trapped in an eternal garden with a bunch of singing nymphs and a tree full of off-limits. Fruit can be... He's asleep. He's not on fire. And he hasn't, as far as you can tell, developed any sudden philosophical objections to his primary function. Another successful dragon check. The apples, therefore, are secure from at least one potential, albeit highly unlikely, internal threat. On to the next thrilling item on the agenda. With Ladon's continued multi-headed slumber reassuringly confirmed, or at least as reassuring as 100 sleeping dragon heads can ever truly be, your attention, and indeed the entire purpose of your immortal existence, now shifts to the gleaming centerpiece of this eternally twilit garden, the tree of golden apples. You drift closer, the soft, mossy ground cool beneath your bare nymph feet. The tree itself is a marvel, ancient beyond reckoning. Its bark like burnished silver, its leaves a shimmering cascade of emerald and gold, perpetually rustling with a gentle musical sigh, even when no discernible breeze stirs the air. It radiates a soft, internal luminescence, casting its own gentle glow upon the surrounding flora, a beacon of otherworldly beauty in this land of perpetual evening. And there they are, hanging like solidified droplets of captured sunlight amidst the ethereal leaves, are the golden apples. These famed golden apples were originally a wedding gift from Gaia, the Earth Mother, to Hera upon her marriage to Zeus, intended to grant immortality or simply representing supreme preciousness and divine blessing. And Hera, quite understandably, wanted them well guarded. Each one is perfectly formed, impossibly round, their skins of flawless, unblemished gold that seems to drink in the twilight and radiate it back with an even softer, more concentrated glow. They don't appear to ripen further, nor do they ever fall or show the slightest hint of decay. They just hang there, eternally, perfectly, resplendently golden, and, of course, completely off limits to you. Now begins the next crucial and mind-numbingly repetitive phase of your daily schedule, the apple audit. Time for the great golden apple census. Population still annoyingly perfect. Still precisely the same number as it was at the last audit. And the one before that. And the one stretching back into the mists of time so thick you'd need a divine machete to hack your way through them. You suspect that if one of these pristine fruits ever spontaneously developed a tiny character-building bruise, or perhaps a rebellious streak of slightly less than perfect gold, Hera would probably smite the entire garden with a plague of particularly judgmental, screeching peacocks. The pressure to maintain perfection, even when that perfection is inherently self-maintaining, is immense. Or at least, it would be, if you weren't so accustomed to it. You begin your meticulous inspection, a task performed with the outward gravitas of a master jeweler assessing the crown jewels, but with an internal monologue that probably runs something like, apple number 1, let's call you Aurelius, still hanging precariously close to that low sweeping branch. Yep, still golden, still apple-shaped, still stubbornly refusing to do anything remotely interesting. Like, say, hum little tune, or perhaps spontaneously predict next week's critically unchanging ambrosia menu. The suspense is, as always, quite underwhelming. You've developed this little habit over the eons, this quirky internal cataloging system, giving each apple an unspoken name and a vague personality based purely on its position or the way the light hits it. There's gloomy Gus near the back, always in shadow, flashy Fiona, who catches the light just so, and Reginald, the one you always check first, simply because he was the first one you named, all those countless twilight cycles ago. It's a tiny, almost pathetic rebellion against the crushing monotony, a way to inject a sliver of narrative into an utterly static scene. You move from apple to apple, your gaze sweeping over their luminous surfaces. Are there any blemishes? No. Any signs of unauthorized nibbling from particularly ambitious ethereal squirrels? Never. Any attempts at self-transmutation into, say, a golden pear, just for a change of pace? Sadly, no. Historians still argue whether the golden apples of the Hesperides were literally made of solid gold, thus incredibly heavy and impractical as actual fruit. A symbolic representation of incorruptibility, divine wealth, and eternal life. Or if the term golden referred more poetically to their unique, luminous, sunlight color, and magical life-enhancing properties rather than their precise metallic composition. Honestly, you've had millennia to ponder this, and you're still not entirely sure. They feel dense, and they certainly look golden. Beyond that, their internal makeup is a mystery Hera has not seen fit to share with her eternally vigilant and eternally curious guardians. The task is absurd. Of course, the apples are magical. Ladon, despite his current state of extreme napping, is a formidable deterrent. You and your equally immortal, equally vigilant sisters are always here. The chances of an apple going missing or spontaneously combusting are, to put it mildly, astronomically low. Yet the audit must be performed. It's in the job description, presumably etched onto some celestial contract you all vaguely remember agreeing to in a fit of youthful divine enthusiasm. Your official report, if you ever actually had to compile and submit one, would likely read apples present and accounted for, goldenness level optimal, luster consistently high, current threat level from mortal heroes with questionable motives, and a hero complex generally low. But it's still only mid-morning, eternity-wise, so one remains, as ever, cautiously bored. And so, you complete your circuit of the tree, your count matching yesterday's, and the eon before that's. Every golden sphere is in its place, radiating its gentle, unchanging light. The audit is complete. The universe is, for now, safe from a critical shortage of Hera's golden, off-limits fruit. Another triumph of diligent, if deeply unexciting, guardianship. The apples remain a silent, gleaming testament to divine power, marital bliss, or at least marital gift-giving, and your own unending, twilight-drenched employment. The crucial, if deeply uninspiring, tasks of your early morning shift are complete. Ladon, your multi-headed, perpetually sleepy co-guardian, is still achieving new zeniths of draconic slumber. And the golden apples, those famously off-limits baubles of immortality, have passed their daily audit with, as ever, flying colors, specifically gold. So, what now? What fills the vast, shimmering, twilight-drenched hours? Days, centuries, millennia, until it's time to, well, do it all again. Now you enter the truly unstructured, creatively barren expanse of your eternal schedule. Divine snacks and endless chatter with your equally immortal, equally sequestered sisters. First, sustenance. As nymphs of divine parentage, you don't exactly pop down to the local Olympian deli for a hero sandwich. Your diet consists primarily of nectar and ambrosia, the legendary food and drink of the gods themselves. Nectar, the sweet, honey-like beverage, and ambrosia, the fragrant, edible substance, were the traditional sustenance of the Greek gods and other immortal beings, said to confer or maintain their immortality and be unimaginably delightful to mortal palates. And it is, you suppose, quite delightful. Breakfast time. You gracefully approach a small, crystalline spring that bubbles up pure nectar, or perhaps one of your sisters. Hesperia, maybe, who's on ambrosia duty this particular century, ladles out a shimmering spoonful of the stuff from an ever-full mother-of-pearl dish. Today's ambrosia has subtle notes of, well, ambrosia, with a distinct hint of eternity and a lingering finish of, is it time for our nap equivalent yet? Or are we still pretending this cycle has discernible phases? It's divinely delicious. We've had this exact same, divinely delicious. Never varies by a single sparkle meal for the last 12 millennia. Give or take a few geological ages kind of way. Variety, it seems, is a spice not stocked in Hera's eternal garden pantry. With your ethereal energy levels topped up, the main activity, aside from simply existing and looking picturesquely nymph-like amidst the glowing foliage, is conversation, or more accurately, the continuation of conversations that began before mountains rose and fell in the mortal world. You and your sisters, Agil, with her radiant light, Erithia, the blushing one. Arethusa, if she's part of your particular Hesperidian cohort, are your soul companions. You gather on a bank of soft, star-like moss, or beneath the shade of a tree that has never known a season other than this perpetual, gentle gloaming. And you talk, or you sing. Your voices are legendary, of course, weaving harmonies so pure and enchanting they could soothe the savage breast of, well, not Ladon. He just snores louder, but perhaps a very aesthetically inclined rock. Historians still argue whether the Hesperides' famous songs were primarily joyful expressions of their idyllic, if profoundly isolated, existence, perhaps celebrating the beauty of the garden and the sacred apples, or if they were more melancholic, almost lamentations for a wider world they could not join, and experiences they could never have, or even if their melodies possessed a subtle, hypnotic enchantment designed to further protect the garden and its divine treasures from any unwelcome intrusion. You suspect it's a bit of all three, depending on the mood of the millennium. Some days you sing of the golden light, some days of the distant, unknown sea, and some days you just hum a vaguely mournful tune that perfectly encapsulates the feeling of counting the same 53 or whatever the unchanging number is, apples for the 900 billionth time. The chatter itself is an art form honed by eons of practice. You've exhausted every conceivable topic of conversation approximately 7 primordial ages ago. Yet, you persist. Your sister Agil, for instance, is currently recounting, for what you estimate to be the 7,432nd time, give or take a few dozen tellings where you might have drifted into a particularly deep reverie, the thrilling story of that one time a cloud, a particularly fluffy cumulus, almost, looked like a hero trying to sneak into the garden from the northwest. The narrative tension is, as always, utterly non-existent, because, spoiler alert, it was, in fact, just a cloud. But her delivery, you have to admit, is impeccable after so much dedicated practice. She's really nailed the dramatic pause before the reveal that it was, tragically, just water vapor. To combat the sheer predictability, you've collectively developed, over countless centuries, an incredibly complex, purely conversational, and entirely theoretical game. It doesn't have a name, or a board, or any pieces. One of you starts a scenario. Imagine a world where apples are blue and guard themselves, and our only job is to teach them advanced interpretive dance for Hera's birthday mask. And then you take turns adding rules, complications, philosophical objections, and dramatic plot twists all purely through dialogue. The rules of the game shift entirely based on whose turn it is to invent them that particular eon, which keeps it, well, not exactly fresh, but at least bafflingly convoluted enough to occupy a few hours of eternity before you lapse back into more familiar conversational ruts. You try to vary these more standard conversational ruts too, injecting a bit of intellectual spice into the nectar and ambrosia routine. So, Erithia, you might offer, gazing thoughtfully at a perfectly still, golden apple. Any new existential insights today on the inherent paradox of guarding fruit that supposedly grants immortality when we're already immortal and, frankly, could do with a bit less of it if it means something interesting might finally happen? Usually she just sighs, a sound like wind through dying but eternally undead reeds, and suggests another thrilling round of Guess That Snore Pattern Ladon's Greatest Hits, Volume 73. It's not all bad. This endless companionship. There's a deep, unspoken understanding between you and your sisters, a bond forged in the crucible of shared immortality and monumental boredom. You know each other's thoughts before they're spoken, can finish each other's millennia-old sentences, and provide a unique, if unchanging, form of comfort. But there are also times when the sheer, unadulterated sameness of it all, the endless loop of familiar voices and well-worn anecdotes, makes you want to scream into a silken, twilight-hued pillow. If only you had pillows, or anything that wasn't a perfectly smooth, unscream into Abel mossbank. Nectar, ambrosia, and endless, looping chatter. These are the threads that weave together the vast, empty spaces of your monotonous, apple-guarding existence, providing a semblance of daily rhythm in a place where time itself seems to have taken a permanent vacation. The ambrosia has been nibbled. The last ethereal notes of your thousand-year-old song have faded into the perpetual twilight, and your sister Erithia is just about to launch into her epic multi-eon analysis of a particularly intricate snore pattern she detected emanating from Layden's head on year 17, the one that looks vaguely like a grumpy badger. It's at moments like these, when the sheer, unadulterated sameness of your existence threatens to achieve a kind of cosmic critical mass, that your mind, perhaps out of a deeply ingrained sense of self-preservation or just sheer, unadulterated habit, snaps back to the core principle, the singular, unwavering directive that defines your entire being. The rule. There's only one. Really. It's not a complex legal code, it's refreshingly, terrifyingly concise. Your divine job description, if it were ever formally written down on a scroll of celestial parchment, would probably be remarkably brief. Page 1. Mind the fruit. Page 2. Seriously, don't let anyone, and we mean anyone, especially not your occasionally grumpy Titan dad who's holding up the entire sky next door and might be looking for a particularly shiny and conveniently located healthy snack. Mess with the fruit? End of manual. Welcome to eternal employment. This prime directive. Don't touch Hera's wedding apples. Or, more accurately, ensure no one else does. And try not to look at them too longingly yourselves is the bedrock of your existence. These aren't just any pretty but glowing baubles. The golden apples were specifically Hera's personal property. A sacred wedding gift from Gaia, kept in her own private, divinely secured orchard, making their theft or damage not merely a crime against horticulture, but a direct, egregious offense against the formidable queen of the Olympian gods. And Hera, as you are keenly, perpetually aware, is not known for her laid-back attitude when it comes to her possessions, her authority, or pretty much anything. Really? The imagined consequences of failure, should an apple go missing on your watch. Pre-Heracles, of course, are enough to give even an immortal nymph a slight case of the ethereal shivers. Divine retribution, cosmic imbalance, or just a really angry Hera, which, frankly, is probably worse than any localized cosmic imbalance. You picture thunderbolts? Lots of thunderbolts. And probably a strongly worded memo circulated to all minor deities regarding Apple security protocol adherence failures. The simplicity of the rule is almost a mockery when set against the backdrop of eternity. It's easy to understand keep unauthorized hands, mortal, divine, or otherwise off the glowing fruit. But adhering to this one, unwavering instruction, day in, day out, for millennia upon millennia, with no other discernible purpose or variation in your routine, is the real existential challenge. It's like being told not to press a giant, glowing, incredibly tempting red button that's the only interesting feature in an otherwise empty room for the rest of time. Except the button is an apple, and pressing it means facing the incandescent wrath of the most powerful goddess on Olympus. The psychological weight of this single, immutable instruction has, over the eons, become less a command and more an intrinsic part of your very being, as fundamental to your identity as a Hesperide as your shimmering twilight glow, or your ability to sing hauntingly beautiful songs about, well, apples and twilight. To cope, or perhaps just to pass the eons with a sliver of creative expression, you and your sisters have developed a series of increasingly elaborate and highly dramatic interpretive dances. The theme, do not under any circumstances, even think about considering the possibility of perhaps, maybe touching Hera's golden apples. Seriously, you perform these intricate choreographies involving much graceful arm waving, stern nymphly glaring, and symbolic representations of divine fury, usually involving a lot of dramatic, shimmering fabric twirling. For your own amusement, of course, and only when you're absolutely certain Hera isn't psychically tuning in for a surprise performance review. It's your quirky little in-joke, a silent rebellion of artistry against the starkness of the one big rule. Historians still argue whether the Hesperides' role as guardians of these sacred apples was fundamentally a position of immense honor, entrusting them with a divine treasure of unparalleled importance, or if it was, in essence, a form of beautiful, gilded imprisonment, an inescapable servitude to Hera's divine will. However pretty the cage, some days when the twilight feels particularly luminous and your singing voices are in perfect harmony, it almost feels like the former. Most other days, especially when Erithia is on her third retelling of the cloud that almost looked like a hero saga, it definitely leans towards the latter. A very scenic, five-star eternal detention facility. But detention nonetheless. The ultimate irony, of course, is that these apples supposedly grant or maintain immortality, and you, their guardians, are already immortal. It's like being a highly specialized, eternally vigilant lifeguard at a magical chocolate fountain that dispenses everlasting life, when you're already made of everlasting chocolate yourself and are, frankly, a bit sick of the smell. The cosmic joke writers, you often think, really outdid themselves when they drafted your particular job assignment. Let's make them guard the one thing they absolutely do not need and can never have, for eternity. And let's put it in a really pretty, really boring garden. With a sleepy dragon? Perfect. And so, the rule echoes in your mind, the silent, unwavering bedrock of your monotonous existence. You sometimes get the fleeting, rebellious urge to just inscribe apples still here. All gold? No touching. Obviously, it's been 3,000 years. No one's touched them. We get it. On a giant magically preserved leaf and hang it prominently on the tree for Hera's benefit, just to save everyone the bother of her occasional unnerving spot checks. But divine human resources, you suspect, probably wouldn't approve of such cheeky informality. The rulebook, however slim, is absolute. And you, a Hesperid, are its eternal, twilight-bound enforcer. The eons drift by, each one a near-perfect replica of the last, filled with the gentle murmur of your sister's never-ending conversations, the distant, multi-decibel sighs of Ladon, and the soft, unchanging glow of Hera's golden apples. You're probably midway through a particularly insightful analysis of whether the seventh apple from the left on the third branch down has achieved a new, almost imperceptible level of luminous perfection. Or perhaps you're humming a tune so ancient it predates most of the current Olympian pantheon. Suddenly, a subtle shift occurs in the very fabric of the garden's perpetual twilight. The air, usually so still and fragrant with otherworldly blossoms, seems to hold its breath. The gentle rustling music of the leaves on the sacred tree falters. Even Ladon, in his profound slumber, might emit a particularly resonant snore from Hednashsaku 14, as if sensing an impending disturbance in the force. Oh, joy! The atmosphere just crackled with that unique blend of divine disapproval and the faint, unmistakable scent of impending micromanagement. Must be Tuesday. Or, whichever arbitrary Eon Hera, Queen of the Gods, all-powerful boss lady of the apples, decides to spot check a clock. There's no formal announcement, no blaring celestial trumpets unless she's in a particularly dramatic mood, just a growing sense of presence. The silvery twilight might seem to intensify slightly, taking on a more judgmental sheen. The distant melancholic groans of your father, Atlas, might even quiet down for a moment, as if he too knows better than to provide any distracting background noise during a Hera inspection. You and your sisters exchange almost imperceptible glances, the kind that convey entire volumes of shared experience and mild panic in the space of a single, gracefully arched eyebrow. Instantly, you all adopt your "we are eternally vigilant," deeply contemplative, and definitely not bored. Out of our divine minds after millennia of doing absolutely nothing else as poses, this generally involves a lot of serene staring into the middle distance, preferably in the direction of the apple tree. For bonus points, occasionally nodding thoughtfully at a specific apple as if it has just imparted some profound cosmic wisdom, and ensuring your ethereal draperies are artfully, yet modestly, arranged. And then she materializes. Or perhaps she strides in through some unseen gateway only she can access. However she arrives, Hera's presence is unmistakable. Hera, as queen of the gods and wife of Zeus, was known for her regal, often imposing, majesty. Her fierce protection of her domains and symbols of status like these apples, and a notoriously jealous and often vengeful temperament, particularly when she felt slighted or her authority challenged. She is grandeur personified, her eyes like chips of sapphire, her expression usually hovering somewhere between divinely unimpressed and actively searching for something to smite. She might be alone, or perhaps flanked by a pair of glowering, iridescent peacocks, her sacred birds, who eye you and your sisters with what can only be described as disdainful, paltry suspicion. The spot check begins. Her gaze, sharper than any obsidian blade, sweeps across her garden. First, the apples. She'll drift towards the tree, perhaps even brushing a perfectly manicured divine fingertip against one of the golden fruits. Not in a covetous way they are hers, after all, but in an assessing, proprietary manner. You all collectively hold your breath, hoping that Aurelius, Flashy Fiona, and Reginald are all gleaming to her exact specifications. Then, her attention will turn to Ladon, the dragon. Bless his sleepy, hundredfold heart, usually manages to sense the shift in divine pressure. Perhaps 3 or 4 of his 100 heads will reluctantly creak open an eye, blink slowly, and emit a puff of smoke from one nostril that could charitably be described as alert-ish. It's his deeply ingrained way of saying, "Yes, your august majesty, the fruit is indeed still remarkably fruit-like. All accounted for. No unauthorized snacking. Now, if you'll excuse me..." Zzz. Hera usually just gives him a look that could curdle nectar. Then, it's your turn. Her gaze sweeps over you and your sisters. Are you alert? You certainly look alert, thanks to years of practice. Are you suitably reverent? Your thoughtful nodding at Apple's game is strong. Is the garden immaculate? It always is. It's magical. She rarely speaks. Perhaps a curt nod, or a single, critically raised eyebrow that conveys more disapproval than a 10-volume epic poem on the failings of nymphal vigilance. Historians still argue whether Hera's direct, personal involvement in overseeing the garden of the Hesperides was a frequent occurrence, indicating her deep and continuous personal investment in this sacred space, or if such divine interventions were exceptionally rare, with the garden's inherent sanctity and its designated guardians largely expected to be self-sustaining under her distant, but absolute authority. From your perspective, each visit feels simultaneously like an eternity and far too short to adequately prove your unwavering dedication to Apple security. There is one tiny, almost imperceptible gesture you've all learned to watch for. A quirky little tell that signals the inspection might be nearing its hopefully non-smitey conclusion. If Hera is almost satisfied, if no glaring infractions against Apple integrity have been detected, she will sometimes make a minuscule, almost invisible adjustment to her royal diadem, a tiny twitch of her fingers as if ensuring its perfect alignment. That's your cue for a collective, internal sigh of relief so profound it could probably generate a gentle breeze across the entire garden, were it not so expertly suppressed. Once that diadem twitch happens, you know you're likely in the clear for another few centuries, or at least until her next unscheduled drop-in. And then, as suddenly as she arrived, she's gone. The oppressive divine presence lifts. The air returns to its usual gentle fragrance. The twilight softens back to its familiar, less judgmental glow. Ladon's remaining open eyes snap shut with audible clicks. You and your sisters might allow yourselves a delicate, nymph-like exhalation. The garden returns to its regularly scheduled programming of beautiful, serene, mind-numbing boredom. These rare, nerve-wracking visits from the Queen of Olympus are the only real punctuation marks in an otherwise seamless, featureless stretch of eternity. They are a stark reminder of the importance of your task, the power you serve, and the ever-present, if usually distant, scrutiny under which you perform your monotonous golden duty. The divine tension of Hera's unannounced spot check has finally dissipated. Like morning mist that was never actually morning mist because it's always twilight here. The garden settles back into its familiar, shimmering languor. Ladon's resumed his full complement of snores, each head apparently having decided that the brief period of semi-alertness was quite enough excitement for 1 century. You and your sisters exchanged those long, all-knowing, "Well, that happened," nymphal glances, just as you're about to suggest a rousing game of Let's Hum Ancient Hymns. Slightly off-key to see if it annoys the sacred apple tree into dropping a leaf it never does. Another familiar and far more constant. Sound filters through the perfumed air. Ah, yes, it's Dad. Time for the daily, or rather, eternal, groanogram from your father, the Titan Atlas, who happens to have the rather unfortunate Zeus-mandated job of holding up the entire sky, conveniently located just a stone's throw if you were strong enough to throw a stone that far, which you're not, because upper body strength isn't really in the nymph job description from your garden. Atlas, one of the mighty titans who fought against Zeus and the Olympians in the Titanomachy, was condemned for his role in the war to stand at the western edge of Gaia, the earth, and bear the weight of Uranos, the heavens, upon his massive shoulders for all eternity. And if popular mythological genealogy is to be believed, and it's usually best to just nod along when divine parentage is involved, this eternally burdened titan is your dear old dad, with Hesperis, the nymph of evening, being your mother. This makes family reunions complicated and noisy. His proximity means that his monumental efforts, his cosmic suffering, are a near-constant auditory backdrop to your otherwise serene, if monotonous, existence. You hear it now, a low, resonant rumble that seems to vibrate through the very soil of the garden, a sound deeper than thunder, more weary than 1,000 winters. It's the sound of unimaginable weight being borne, of muscles sculpted from mountains straining against the infinite pressure of the celestial sphere. Ah, there it is. Dad's 3 millennium BCE celestial forecast, brought to you by the power of sheer, unadulterated agony. Sky conditions still oppressively heavy. Chance of continued localized divine backache 100%, with gusts up to excruciating. Long-term outlook for relief not in this particular cosmic epoch. Kids. So don't hold your breath, unless you're already immortal and don't need to breathe much anyway. Over the eons, you and your sisters have become rather adept at interpreting the nuances of his groans. It's your own quirky, familial groan code. A short, sharp exhalation usually means a particularly troublesome constellation. Perhaps Orion and his overly pointy belt is digging into his left shoulder. A long, drawn-out, rumbling sigh often indicates that Zeus has just launched another volley of particularly showy thunderbolts somewhere in the mortal realm, and the resulting vibrations are not doing Dad's posture any favors. And then there's the series of low, rhythmic grunts. That's just him trying to subtly shift the weight from one cosmic trapezius to the other without accidentally dropping a significant portion of the firmament. You try to tune it out most of the time. You really do. It's essential for maintaining a semblance of nymphal serenity. But after a few millennia, Dad's groaning just becomes an inescapable part of the ambient soundscape, like the gentle, never-ceasing rustle of the golden leaves, or Ladon's head number 47 having a particularly vivid, snuffling dream about chasing herds of ethereal star sheep across the Milky Way. Your feelings about his eternal predicament are like most things in your timeless existence, complicated and well-worn. There's a daughterly sympathy, of course. It can't be pleasant, holding up the sky. You imagine the celestial crick in his neck must be legendary, but there's also a faint, unspoken frustration. His constant booming misery rather puts a damper on any attempts at light-hearted garden frolics. Not that you have many of those these days anyway. And the irony isn't lost on you. He's engaged in this monumental, galaxy-sustaining labor, while you and your sisters are primarily tasked with looking pretty and ensuring fruit doesn't get inexplicably mobile. Historians still argue whether the mythological proximity of Atlas to the Garden of the Hesperides was merely a geographical convenience in ancient storytelling, placing two significant Western wonders together at the world's rim, or if it held deeper symbolic meaning regarding the Titan's ultimate defeat. The establishment of Zeus's cosmic order, and perhaps even the Hesperides' unique role as guardians, situated between the old, chaotic Titan realm and the new Olympian dominion. You don't really talk to him much. The acoustics aren't great, for one thing, with him being several mountain ranges tall and you being, well, nymph-sized. And what would you say? Having a good sky-holding day. Dad. Anything interesting happen in the celestial sphere lately, aside from the usual soul-crushing weight? Sometimes one of you might sing a particularly poignant melody in his general direction, a wordless offering of sympathy, but it's likely lost in the vastness and his own focused suffering. He certainly never offers any fatherly advice, unless try not to get a job holding up the sky. It's murder on the deltoids counts. Sometimes you just want to shout over what with all the lung power your ethereal form can muster. Hey, Dad, have you tried some deep knee bends? Maybe a celestial chiropractor? Perhaps a well-placed divine fulcrum? But then you remember he's supporting the entire actual sky, with all its stars, planets, and miscellaneous divine real estate, and your own apple guarding gig, with its primary occupational hazards being terminal boredom and the occasional risk of being mildly disapproved of by Hera, suddenly seems comparatively cushy. Perspective. It's a powerful thing, even in an eternal twilight. His groans continue, a steadfast, miserable rhythm, just another unchanging, deeply monotonous element of your timeless, apple-centric world. The groans of your father, Atlas, continue their percussive lament from just beyond the garden's edge, a familiar bass note in the symphony of your eternal twilight existence. It's a sound so constant it's almost faded into the silence, like the rhythmic tick of a cosmic clock whose hands never actually move. But then, occasionally, another, far more subtle sound will weave its way through the shimmering leaves of the golden apple tree. A gentle sigh, a soft rustle that doesn't quite match the usual stillness of the air. A fleeting scent of distant salt spray or crushed wildflowers from lands you can only imagine. Ah, a faint, almost imperceptible flutter in the westernmost leaves, where the light seems to coalesce. That'll be Zephyrus, the west wind. Our occasional newsbringer, probably here to tell us all about the thrilling new developments in migratory bird fashion over the Peloponnese. Or perhaps how Poseidon's misplaced his trident again during a particularly vigorous argument with a kraken. Hold on to your ethereal, non-existent hats. Sisters, because this is about as wild and unpredictable as it generally gets in your meticulously scheduled monotony. Zephyrus, the Greek god of the west wind, was typically considered the gentlest and most favorable of the anemoi, the divine personifications of the winds, often seen as a harbinger of spring and the bearer of soft, life-giving breezes. He's not like Boreas, His blustery northern brother, who'd probably try to blow all the apples off the tree just for a laugh? Or Notice, the south wind, who'd bring uncomfortable, damp heat? Zephyrus is usually a rather pleasant, if somewhat insubstantial, visitor. His arrival is less an event and more a slight modulation in the garden's perpetual ambience. The temperature might not change. The twilight remains stubbornly consistent, but there's a brief stirring, a whisper of movement that momentarily disrupts the perfect, artful stillness. He drifts in, a shimmering, barely visible presence, his voice like the rustle of silk or the distant sigh of waves on an unknown shore. And he brings news. Snippets from the mortal world, tales of heroes rising and falling, mostly falling. If you've noticed the general trend in those stories, cities being built and occasionally dramatically unbuilt. He whispers of the latest scandals on Mount Olympus, who Zeus is currently disguised as, which goddess Hera is currently plotting elaborate revenge against, whether Dionysus has invented a new and even more alarming type of wine. He means well, Zephyrus does. He probably thinks he's bringing you vital, engaging updates from the bustling, dynamic world beyond your secluded haven. But his idea of breaking news is usually something along the lines of, Persephone is back from the underworld again. Everyone's spring is officially sprung in the upper world. And you and your sisters just nod politely and smile your most serene, nymphly smiles, thinking, that's perfectly lovely for them, dear. It's still Tuesday-ish. Adjacent, here in the Garden of Eternal Twilight, and the apples, Mike, as you can see, are still resolutely golden and stubbornly refusing to acknowledge seasonal variation. He seems to have a particular soft spot for your sister Egil, the radiant one. He'll often manifest a single, perfect, impossibly delicate flower from some far-flung meadow he's just passed through. A bloom that glows with an unnatural vibrancy for a few precious moments before dissolving back into pure air, as ephemeral as his whispered words. Egil always accepts these fleeting gifts with a graceful nod, her expression one of gentle, timeless melancholy as she watches them vanish. It's a rather fitting metaphor for his visits. Really a brief, beautiful, and ultimately inconsequential offering that changes nothing. Historians still argue whether the anemoi, like Zephyrus, were perceived by the ancient Greeks as fully independent divine entities with their own distinct personalities, motivations, and agendas, or if they were viewed primarily as personified forces of nature, acting as passive messengers or instruments for the will of more powerful Olympian deities like Zeus or Poseidon. Watching Zephyrus earnestly trying to explain the intricacies of a chariot race scandal to your sister Hesperia, who looks like she's mentally cataloging Aladdin's toenails. You lean towards well-meaning but slightly clueless independent entity with a limited grasp of his audience's actual interests. You try to look interested in his tales of mortal folly and Olympian melodrama. You really do. You ask polite, vague questions. Oh, another war over a stolen queen. How predictable. Or a new monster with an improbable number of heads terrorizing Phoenicia? You say fascinating. Does it snore as much as ours? It's like listening to someone enthusiastically describe a really exciting, incredibly vivid dream they had. Absolutely fascinating for them. Mildly baffling and utterly comprehensively irrelevant to your own apple-guarding key performance indicators, which remain stubbornly fixed at Apple's golden location still on tree. Mortal intrusions, preferably 0. After a while, his whispers will fade. The sense of the outside world will dissipate, and Zephyrus will sigh his gentle way back out of the garden, off to carry his news or lack thereof to other, perhaps more receptive, corners of the earth. He leaves no lasting impression, save perhaps for a few unusually agitated leaves that quickly settle back into their eternal twilight repose. The garden returns to its profound, undisturbed quiet, punctuated only by Dad's distant groans and Ladon's occasional multi-symphonic snuffle. This brief, airy connection to the tumultuous world beyond your shimmering borders is over. Another cycle of news from nowhere special complete. It was a diversion of sorts for about 5 minutes. Now back to the regularly scheduled eternity of Apple watching. Zephyrus, with his fleeting whispers of the vibrant, chaotic world beyond, has long since dissolved back into the gentle, unchanging air currents of your perpetual twilight. The brief, almost imperceptible ripple his visit caused in the stagnant pond of your existence has smoothed over, leaving the surface of eternity just as placid and undisturbed as before. Atlas resumes his full, groaning symphony next door. Loudon's 100 heads are once again united in profound, snore-filled slumber, and the golden apples, yet well, they continue to be resolutely golden and stubbornly immobile. And so, with the excitement of potential outside news now a distant memory about 10 minutes ago, which is practically yesterday in Hesperidian time, you and your sisters turn to the next, equally crucial phase of your daily schedule, the vital, absorbing, and utterly pointless make-work tasks designed to fill the gleaming, empty chalice of your immortal watch. You see, even for divine nymphs blessed with eternal youth, beauty, and an apparently inexhaustible supply of ambient, magical lighting, simply existing motionlessly for millennia can get a tad wearing on the soul. So, over the eons, you've developed, or perhaps Hera has subtly implied you should develop, a series of activities that give the illusion of purpose, a gentle hum of busyness in a garden where nothing actually needs doing. Today's exciting agenda, you muse as you select a particularly soft, freshly fallen, yet, of course, eternally undecayed silver leaf to use as a polishing cloth, likely includes advanced bark buffing, with a special focus on the northwestern quadrant of the main apple tree trunk, which looked a fraction of a shade less supernaturally gleaming than usual during yesterday's apple audit. This will be followed by a deeply engaging seminar, conducted via interpretive sighing with your sister Egil, on existential leaf piles to rake or not to rake when they never actually decompose anyway, and we have no rakes riveting stuff. The Garden of the Hesperides itself is often described in ancient myths as a divinely beautiful, miraculously fertile, and intrinsically magical place, where the trees and flowers are perpetually in bloom, and everything is essentially self-sustaining, requiring no normal cultivation or effort to maintain its perfection. This, naturally, makes most traditional gardening tasks entirely superfluous. Yet, you persist. You approach the great silver-barked trunk of the sacred apple tree. Its surface is already smoother than polished marble, gleaming with an inner light. But still, you begin to gently buff a section. Your movements slow, graceful, and utterly without practical effect. The bark feels cool and strangely alive beneath your touch, humming with a faint, ancient energy. It doesn't get any shinier, of course. It's already at peak, divinely mandated shininess. But the motion is something. It's a rhythm, a focus, a way to make the twilight hours feel as though they contain action, however illusory. Perhaps later, Erithia will decide that the fallen golden petals from the never-fading star blossoms that carpet certain areas of the garden are not arranged in a sufficiently aesthetically pleasing manner today. She'll then spend the next century or so meticulously nudging them with her delicate nymph toes into breathtakingly intricate, ephemeral mandalas. Spirals that represent, she once explained with a faraway look in her eyes, the cyclical nature of time, the birth and death of stars, and the profound philosophical implications of a really good nap. These delicate artworks are, of course, usually disturbed by the next almost imperceptible sigh of the wind or the twitch of Ladon's tail. Head number 83 has a very restless tail twitch when dreaming of chasing comets. But the process, for Erithia, seems to be the point. It's her quirky, centuries-long meditation on impermanence in a place where nothing truly changes. My sister Arethusa, if she's part of your current nymphly quartet, has spent the last 3 centuries, on and off, painstakingly arranging fallen star blossoms into a perfect, ever-expanding spiral that she claims represents the inevitable heat death of the universe. Or possibly just a really big celestial cinnamon bun. It's very calming to watch her, and you have to admit, a great way to use up a Tuesday, or what currently passes for one in your timeless work experience program from Olympus. You might also decide to water the apple tree, pouring a delicate stream of pure nectar from a scallop shell onto its already perfectly hydrated roots, or perhaps engage in a bit of pruning, which involves looking intently at an already flawless branch and then deciding, with much thoughtful deliberation, not to remove it. Sometimes, you try to teach a particularly stubborn-looking golden apple the lyrics to a very long, very sad ballad about a nymph who had nothing more exciting to do for several millennia than polish apples and sing to unresponsive fruit. The apple, predictably, remains unimpressed, and most annoyingly, still perfectly, beautifully, lyrical free. Historians still argue whether the Hesperides' famed beauty and their renowned association with captivating song and graceful dance were simply inherent attributes of their divine nymphal nature, part of their original mythological concept, or if these artistic expressions were perhaps developed and meticulously refined over countless eons, primarily as a sophisticated, almost desperate coping mechanism against the profound, soul-deep monotony of their eternal, unchanging vigil in a garden where nothing ever truly happens. You hum a few experimental notes, considering a new verse for your ode to an unwavering dewdrop, probably a coping mechanism, a very pretty, very harmonious coping mechanism. These make-work tasks, these gentle, pointless ministrations to an already perfect environment, are the quiet hum beneath the silence of your days. They are the delicate stitches you use to sew one identical moment to the next, creating a fragile illusion of passage and purpose. Without them, you fear the sheer, unadulterated stillness, the perfect, unchanging beauty, might just swallow you whole, leaving nothing but a faint shimmer in the eternal twilight. So you polish the immortal bark, arrange the never-decaying leaves, and sing to the ever-golden fruit, performing your duties in a state of serene, beautifully polished, and profoundly bored dedication. The last perfectly polished segment of immortal tree bark gleams with its usual, unwavering luminescence, reflecting the perpetual twilight of your garden with a steadfast, almost mocking perfection. Your make-work task for this particular portion of the eon is complete. Now what? Another round of Guess Layden's dream content based on Twitching Nostril number 63. Or perhaps a spirited debate with your sisters on the philosophical implications of a dewdrop that never, ever evaporates. The options for genuine, stimulating activity are, as always, spectacularly limited. And so, as the familiar, gentle ennui begins to settle upon you, like a soft, smothering, beautifully embroidered shroud, your mind does what it has learned to do over countless, unchanging centuries it escapes. It drifts away from the serene, static beauty of your gilded cage and heads straight for the biggest, most drama-filled reality show in the cosmos. The never-ending, often scandalous, and always entertaining lives of the Olympian gods. Oh, to be an Olympian, even for a day to experience something, anything, resembling a plot twist or a character arc, your existence is a beautifully illustrated single-page manuscript, stuck on repeat. Their lives, as far as you can gather from the infrequent, often garbled whispers of Zephyrus or the ancient tales passed down before your garden tenure became quite so tenured, are sprawling, multi-volume epic poems filled with thunderous arguments, passionate love affairs, baffling disguises, and a truly impressive amount of impulsive, poorly thought-out smiting. The Olympian gods, unlike you and your rather more subdued nymphal colleagues, were renowned in Greek mythology for their intensely human-like emotions, their bitter rivalries, their complicated family dynamics, their numerous love affairs with mortals and each other, and their dramatic, often capricious interventions in both mortal and divine affairs. It's all terrifically exciting when viewed from an infinite distance. You settle back against a conveniently placed, eternally soft moss bank, and let your imagination take flight. You're currently daydreaming with a certain detached amusement about Zeus's latest reported romantic entanglement. Apparently, according to a particularly breathless gust from Zephyrus last century, which is practically current affairs in your timeline, he transformed into a particularly sparkly, if somewhat bewildered-looking badger this time, all to woo some unsuspecting mortal shepherdess who probably just thought she was having a very strange day with the local wildlife. Honestly, the sheer effort some gods put into avoiding a simple, direct conversation, or perhaps just inventing a decent pickup line that doesn't involve sudden animal transformation, is truly astounding. And it was probably very drafty for the badger, you imagine, especially if it was a celestial badger used to Olympian central heating. You and your sisters have, over the eons, developed this into a kind of ongoing, collaborative storytelling game, your own private Olympian soap opera. When actual news from Zephyrus is scarce, which is most of the time, you take turns inventing new, increasingly outlandish plot twists for your favorite or least favorite deities. Your sister Hesperia, for instance, is currently weaving an elaborate narrative wherein Aphrodite's new, divinely alluring girdle isn't just a fashion statement, but is actually a cunningly disguised celestial tracking device, possibly commissioned by a suspicious Hephaestus or a paranoid Hera, designed to monitor her every flirtatious interaction across the three realms. The theories get pretty wild. You have to admit, especially when your main source of alternative entertainment for several thousand years has been observing the subtle variations in Ladon's snore decibel levels. Historians still argue whether the vivid portrayal of the Olympians' often capricious, morally ambiguous, and decidedly flawed behavior in ancient Greek myths served as a genuine, albeit exaggerated, reflection of prevailing Greek societal values and human nature, a sophisticated form of theological exploration into the complexities of divine power, or simply as a collection of highly entertaining and culturally resonant narratives designed to explain the inexplicable, rationalize natural phenomena, and explore the multifaceted human condition through a conveniently divine, and therefore blameless, lens. You tend to think it's mostly for entertainment, because if the cosmos is actually run with that much drama and poor impulse control, it's a miracle the sky your father is holding up hasn't just given up and collapsed in a fit of exasperated pique. There's a wistful quality to these daydreams. Of course, a gentle, ethereal longing for just a fraction of that agency, that ability to travel, to interact, to make choices that have actual discernible consequences beyond whether a particular patch of bark is optimally buffed. You picture Apollo, flitting about with his lyre and his sun chariot, occasionally chasing after unimpressed nymphs, a trope you find particularly ironic, or Artemis, striding through moonlit forests, beholden to no one. Even Ares, constantly stirring up trouble and starting battles. At least he's doing something, you think, however destructive. If you had a single, tiny, not even golden apple pip for every time an Olympian god apparently started a major, multi-generational war over a perceived slight, a disputed prophecy, or a particularly shiny piece of armor, you'd still have the exact same number of closely guarded golden apples as before. Because you're not allowed to have any, not even the pips. But the principle of the thing. So much drama. So many opportunities for interesting plot developments. These flights of fancy, these vicariously experienced Olympian intrigues, are your mind's escape hatch. They are the vibrant, chaotic tapestries you weave in your imagination to overlay the pale, unchanging silk of your own existence. It's a way to feel connected, however tenuously, to the wider, more dynamic cosmos that exists beyond the shimmering, invisible walls of your beautiful, tranquil, and exquisitely boring prison. So you dream on of thunderbolts and tridents, of love potions and epic quests, populating your quiet garden with the boisterous, flawed, and endlessly fascinating figures of the gods who get to have all the fun, while you just make sure their wedding presents don't get swiped. Your Olympian gossip daydreams, those vibrant, if entirely imaginary, excursions into the chaotic lives of the gods eventually fade, leaving you once again adrift in the serene, unchanging ocean of your own existence. The silence of the garden reasserts itself, thick and sweet with the perfume of eternal blossoms. But sometimes, when the monotony feels particularly profound, or when your sister Arathea starts her epic poem about the subtle emotional nuances of a specific shade of twilight. Volume 7, Canto 432, your mind, and indeed your collective Hesperidian consciousness, inevitably drifts back to the incident, the big one, the unprecedented anomaly. The day the schedule wasn't just disrupted, it was picked up, shaken vigorously like a snow globe full of angry bees, and then casually tossed aside by a very large, very determined, and frankly, rather impolite demigod. Ah, yes, you settle in for another mental replay of the great Heracles kerfuffle of insert vague primordial epic here. We still have internal, highly reflective committee meetings about it, mostly to argue over who screamed the most melodically when Layden's Hednar 7, the one that always fancied itself a skilled negotiator, tried to reason with a heavily muscled hero holding a very large olive wood club. There had been no warning. Not really. Zephyrus hadn't brought any advance whispers of hero on a mission likely to cause significant horticultural disruption. The garden was in its usual state of pristine, twilit perfection. You were probably engaged in a particularly absorbing session of advanced cloud shape analysis, today's theme. Do any of these vaguely resemble a tasty mortal snack we'll never get to eat? When he arrived, Heracles, bless his lion-skin-draped, absurdly muscular, cotton loincloth. He wasn't exactly subtle. Was he more of a smash first, ask incredibly basic, often monosyllabic questions later, possibly while covered in a fine dusting of displaced magical foliage and dragon goo kind of hero? He just sort of appeared, big, sweaty, and looking remarkably out of place, like a bull in a very delicate, very ancient, and very sacred china shop. Your first reaction, and that of your sisters, was probably a collective, perfectly harmonized gasp of sheer, unadulterated shock. A mortal, here in Hera's garden. It was unheard of. It was against all the rules specifically. The one rule. Then came Ladon. Now, Ladon, for all his napping prowess, was still a 100-headed, immortal dragon. You expected a truly epic confrontation, a battle that would shake the very foundations of the world, or at least dislodge a few of your more precariously perched decorative moss arrangements. In many versions of the enduring myth, Heracles, as part of his 11th labor for King Eurystheus, was tasked with retrieving the golden apples. And to do so, he had to overcome their formidable guardian, Lydon, often by killing or grievously wounding the serpent dragon. And overcome him he did. The details are still a bit of a blur, a chaotic montage of roaring from both Heracles and a surprising number of Ladon's suddenly very awake heads, the thud of club against scale, a rather unfortunate amount of displaced earth, and a distinct lingering smell of singed mythological reptile. It was all terribly noisy and, quite frankly, very inconsiderate of the garden's usually impeccable acoustics. While Ladon was indisposed, a delicate euphemism for being pummeled into unconsciousness or worse by a divinely strong hero, Heracles turned his attention to the tree, and to you. Your official stance, as divinely appointed guardians, was, of course, vigorous nymphly dissuasion through the strategic application of interpretive dance, stern looks, and possibly some very high-pitched, ethereal scolding. Hataki, his official stance, as a hero on a tight deadline with labors to complete, was approximately, me Heracles, want shiny fruit, now. The negotiations, as you can probably imagine, were brief and largely one-sided. Your sister Aegle, who always fancied herself a bit of a legal scholar based on some garbled pronouncements from Layton's sleep-talking head. 43. actually tried to argue mythological precedent and cite various obscure divine property bylaws. Heracles, to his credit, looked vaguely confused for a moment, scratched his head with his club, then just sort of grunted and reached for the apples. It was a truly masterful display of ignoring due process. Historians still argue, and ancient sources provide wonderfully conflicting and often embellished accounts regarding the precise method Heracles employed to obtain the apples, particularly concerning the involvement of your father, Atlas. Some say Atlas, weary of his burden, tricked Heracles into holding up the sky while he fetched the apples himself, only for Heracles to then outwit the Titan and reclaim his freedom. Others suggest Heracles dealt with Ladon directly, with Atlas playing a more peripheral or advisory role. From your vantage point during the actual apple acquisition phase, it was mostly just Heracles, a lot of muscles, and a distinct lack of respect for sacred horticulture. He didn't take all of them. Thankfully. Just a few. Enough to satisfy his labor. But the sight of those perfect golden orbs, Hera's sacred wedding gifts, actually being plucked from their branches by a mortal hand, it was an ontological shock. The very fabric of your reality shuddered. Then, with a grunt of satisfaction and a casual nod that probably passed for thanks in his heroic circles, he was gone, leaving behind a rather disheveled dragon. 3 or 4, depending on your current Hesperidian roster, utterly flabbergasted nymphs, and a silence more profound than any you had ever experienced in the garden. The apples were fewer. It was a mathematical impossibility that had suddenly, shockingly, become reality. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of anxious whispers. Much worried, glancing towards the general direction of Olympus, half expecting Hera to appear in a thunderclap of pure, incandescent rage. And a lot of poking Ladon with very long, very delicate twigs to see if any of his heads were still operational. That singular, chaotic day, the Heracles incident, became the ultimate benchmark for excitement, drama, and sheer, unadulterated panic in your otherwise featureless, unchanging existence. It's the story you still tell yourselves. The one truly unique event in your collective memory. A vibrant, if terrifying, splash of color on the pale, endless canvas of your eternal twilight. The dust, both literal and metaphorical, from Heracles' whirlwind visit and brazen apple napping eventually settled. Though settled is perhaps too calm a word for the state of your collective Hesperidian nerves, he was gone. A few of Hera's priceless immortality granting golden apples were also gone. Ladon, your formidable 100-headed co-guardian, was looking decidedly worse for wear, with several heads sporting impressive new lumps, and at least one head number 62, the perpetually optimistic one gazing up at the unchanging twilight with an expression of profound, reptilian disillusionment. The immediate aftermath was a period of stunned silence, punctuated by your sister's increasingly high-pitched, ethereal whimpers of, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." The prime directive had been breached. The one rule, spectacularly broken. The only thought circulating in your immortal mind was, Hera is going to be furious. And oh, how right you were. You don't recall exactly how she found out. Perhaps Zephyrus, sensing an actual, bona fide piece of breaking news for once, zipped over to Olympus with uncharacteristic speed? Perhaps the apples themselves sent out some kind of divine distress signal, a sort of help. I'm being hero-napped? Beacon? Or maybe Hera in her queenly omniscience. Yeah, I just knew. The way a particularly astute gardener just knows when a single prized rose has been improperly sniffed by an unauthorized nostril. However it happened, her arrival was swift, and it was not, shall we say, conducive to a calm and reasoned after-action review. The post-Heracles security debrief with Hera was memorable, mostly for the way her left eyebrow twitched like a trapped, diamond-encrusted hummingbird every time one of you tried to explain, in trembling, melodic tones. Well, he was very, very big. your radiance. And the club was, quite club-like. Hera was famously protective of her sacred symbols of marriage, status, and power, and the golden apples, a deeply personal wedding gift from Gaia, were paramount among these. Their theft would undoubtedly have provoked her legendary and formidable wrath. The air in the garden, usually so serene, crackled with an energy that made your immortal hair stand on end if it wasn't already artfully arranged that way. Ladin's official statement on the incident, delivered via head number 27, always the most diplomatic, if somewhat gurgly. One was apparently a series of deeply regretful, rumbling gurgles, a mournful plume of smoke, and a solemn, multi-headed promise to try and keep at least 5 eyes open simultaneously next time. A suspiciously over-muscled demigod with a hero complex and an apparent disdain for established orchard protocols shows up. Progress. Hera, you recall, was not visibly impressed by this reptilian repentance. Then came the new security protocols. Because of course there were new security protocols. You didn't think Hera would just say, "Oh well, heroes will be heroes," and let you get back to your regularly scheduled eternal boredom. Did you? Oh no. The old monotony, it turned out, had been a rather lax and freewheeling affair compared to the new, Hera-mandated, post-theft monotony 2.0. Your new security directive from on high, delivered with a gaze that could freeze lava, basically boiled down to guard harder. Try not to let any more divinely muscled, kleptomaniacal champions of dubious parentage wander off with my irreplaceable wedding presents. And for Zeus's sake, all of you try to look significantly more vigilant and less like you're about to expire from sheer, unadulterated ennui during my future spot checks. Inspiring stuff? Really? It truly galvanized the spirit of Apple security. One of the more creative additions to your duties, a quirky little innovation clearly designed by a divine bureaucrat with too much time on their ethereal hands, was the new daily reporting system. No longer was a simple, internal confirmation that the apples were still present sufficient. Oh no. Now, at the precise and eternally unchanging midpoint of each twilight day, you and your sisters were required to perform a synchronized, multi-part choral inventory of the remaining apples. Each apple had to be individually acknowledged with a specific, Hera-approved melodic phrase, sung in perfect 4-part harmony, assuming there were 4 of you at the time, detailing its precise location, current level of goldenness always optimal, and a solemn vow of its continued unmolested security. It was, you all privately agreed, even more tedious than just counting them silently. And it did absolutely nothing to improve actual security. Given that Ladon still snored through the entire performance, the Heracles incident, that one blistering spark of actual drama in an ocean of stillness, thus paradoxically led to an even more rigorously enforced and minutely choreographed monotony. The memory of it, however, became your most prized shared anecdote, dissected, replayed, and embellished in your endless conversations for centuries to come. Who said what? How big was that club? Really did. Had number 12 actually try to offer Heracles fashion advice mid-pummeling? Historians still argue whether the successful theft of some of the golden apples by Heracles permanently diminished the magical properties of the remaining fruit, or the overall sanctity of the Garden of Hesperides, or if the inherent regenerative magic of such a divine realm, perhaps aided by Hera's power, quickly restored them to their original pristine state and undiminished significance. From your perspective, the remaining apples still looked just as golden, just as perfect, just as infuriatingly off-limits, but the garden itself felt different, watched, less a forgotten paradise, more a very pretty, high-security celestial vault with slightly traumatized staff. And so, life, or rather eternity, settled into its new rhythm. The apples were guarded with renewed, if slightly resentful, diligence. The songs were sung, the nectar sipped, and Dad's groans provided their usual melancholic soundtrack. The Heracles story became a legend whispered even within its own setting, a constant reminder that even in the most unchanging corner of the cosmos, chaos could very occasionally and very inconveniently barge in and demand a piece of fruit. The post-Heracles era in the Garden of the Hesperides has dawned, or rather has continued its perpetual, now slightly more anxiously observed, twilight. The new Coral Apple inventory reporting system is in full, mind-numbing swing. Loudon has received several stern, if largely ignored, lectures on the importance of at least appearing awake when demigods are in the vicinity. And the apples themselves continue to gleam with their usual, infuriatingly passive perfection. Life, if you can call this timeless, cyclical vigil life, has settled back into a groove of profound, high-security monotony. With ground-level activities offering such limited stimulation, your gaze, and that of your equally sequestered sisters, often drifts upwards, towards the only part of your environment that seems to exhibit any discernible change, the vast, star-dusted tapestry of the heavens above. Even within the soft, diffused luminescence of your eternally twilit garden, the stars are visible, diamond chips scattered across a velvet cloth that never fully darkens to true night nor brightens to unambiguous day. The ancient Greeks, your mortal contemporaries in a world far beyond these enchanted borders, were keen and sophisticated observers of the stars and constellations, using their predictable movements for navigation across treacherous seas, for determining the optimal times for planting and harvest, and as a vast canvas upon which they painted their most enduring myths and legends, you see those same constellations wheeling slowly overhead in their majestic, silent procession. The hunter, Orion, with his glittering belt, the Great Bear, Ursa Major, forever circling the unchanging pole, the Pleiades, those shimmering sisters clustered together like a lost celestial family. Look, Orion's doing his eternal, vaguely menacing hunter strut across the upper atmosphere again. Good for him. Down here, we're still engaged in a deeply philosophical debate about whether slightly more intensely golden than usual this eon counts as a reportable Apple incident requiring an emergency coral update. Thrills all around. Truly. You watch them, these celestial clock hands, marking out cosmic seconds, minutes, and ages. It's a beautiful display. No doubt. The sheer, silent grandeur of it can still, even after millennia, evoke a faint flicker of awe within your immortal, boredom-saturated heart. But the tragicomedy of it all, for you, is that this grand celestial clock is utterly, comprehensively, and hilariously useless. Time, as marked by those distant, wheeling stars, means almost nothing here. The seasons they herald in the mortal world, the bloom of spring, the heat of summer, the melancholy of autumn, the chill of winter, none of them touch your garden. Here it is always a gentle, unchanging, climatically ambiguous sort of, well, always. The solstices and equinoxes, so vital for mortal rituals and agriculture, pass by your domain unmarked, uncelebrated, and largely unheeded, unless Hera suddenly remembers it's time for a surprise solstice-themed Apple security audit. You sometimes try, mostly for your own amusement, to use the constellations to impose some kind of structure on your featureless days. Okay, sisters, you might announce with a flourish of mock importance, when the tip of the celestial serpent-bearer's staff, or as we prefer to call it, Hera's suspiciously long and pointy scrutiny implement, is directly aligned with the third golden apple from the left on the highest branch. It's officially time for on exactly the same thing we were doing 5 minutes ago, and will be doing 5 millennia from now. It's a flawless system for achieving absolutely nothing different. Your sister Hesperia, who has always had a penchant for the minutely observable, has taken this celestial clock watching to a whole new, wonderfully pointless level. She's developed a quirky system of hyper-specific, garden-based micro-prophecies based on the alignment of incredibly obscure, barely visible stars with various features of Ladon's sleeping anatomy. "Mark my words," she'll whisper with an air of profound mystical insight. "When that faint star, the one that looks like a slightly disgruntled celestial gnat, aligns perfectly with the tip of Ladon's 87th nostril, the one that whistles a bit when he's dreaming of chasing comets, a single golden leaf from the sacred tree will almost, but not quite, detach itself from the third westernmost branch, and then, after a moment of profound hesitation, decide against it. And the truly astonishing thing, her prophecies always come true, mostly because absolutely nothing more dramatic ever actually happens to contradict them. It's her way of finding order in the chaos of utter predictability. Historians still argue, in their delightfully earnest mortal way, whether the concept of eternity for divine beings like nymphs, satyrs, or even minor gods in Greek mythology implied a complete philosophical absence of perceived time and subjective change, a sort of static, timeless isness, or if it was experienced more as an incredibly prolonged, but still subjectively sequential and qualitatively textured existence marked by subtle divine rhythms, cosmic cycles, or even periods of intense boredom punctuated by, say, a rampaging demigod. You can tell them from experience it's mostly the latter, with a heavy emphasis on the intense boredom and the subtle divine rhythms, being mostly laden snores and dad's groans. You've seen comets blaze across the celestial dome, their fiery tails a fleeting spectacle of cosmic drama. You've witnessed stars flare up in sudden, brilliant supernovae, then fade slowly back into the void over centuries. The universe, it seems, is putting on this whole spectacular, ever-changing celestial fireworks display, a non-stop galactic reality show. And your primary, divinely ordained contribution to this cosmic grandeur is to make absolutely sure nobody nicks the party favors Hera provided at her wedding. It sometimes feels a touch disproportionate, your role versus the backdrop, and so the stars continue their silent, majestic, and for you, almost entirely irrelevant dance. They mark the passage of eons that bring no change to your garden, no end to your vigil, no relief from the beautiful, shimmering, golden monotony. They are a constant reminder of a vast, dynamic universe existing just beyond your reach, a universe whose time you can watch, but never truly share. Another celestial cycle completes. Another tiny fraction of forever drifts by, noticed only by the distant, glittering eyes of the indifferent cosmos and the occasionally upturned, wistful gaze of a very bored apple-guarding nymph. The distant, glittering stars have performed another of their silent, majestic, and, from your perspective, largely irrelevant pirouettes across the perpetually twilit canvas of the sky. An arbitrary marker in the endless flow of non-time has been reached. According to the highly informal, deeply ingrained, and utterly unwritten Hesperidian Rhoda, a system probably devised eons ago out of sheer, desperate invention to break eternity into slightly more digestible, albeit still eternal, chunks. It's time for a shift change. One of your equally radiant, equally immortal, and equally bored sisters will now nominally take over the primary responsibility of official Apple Stare Guardian, while you nominally recede into a state of official off-duty nymphly languor. The difference, in practical terms, is almost laughably negligible. Right then, your current shift of intensely focused, high-stakes fruit observation is over. Time to formally hand over the awesome responsibility of staring intently at stationary, self-polishing, magically adhered to the tree fruit to your equally qualified and probably just as deeply, existentially weary sister, the ceremonial passing of the unblinking stare. You sometimes joke silently to yourself, is always a true highlight of your collective millennia. You gracefully rise from your patch of unusually comfortable moss, which you've been subtly cultivating for the last 7 centuries by sighing, particularly fertilizing sighs upon it, and approach, let's say, Erythea, who has been engaged in a profound study of a single unmoving cobweb for the past few eons. The number of Hesperides varies in ancient sources, typically cited as three or four, with lyrical names like Eagle Radiance, Erythea Reddish Glow, Hesperia Evening Star Michning, and Arethusa Waterer being common, though sometimes up to seven are mentioned in different myths or artistic depictions. So, there's a small team of you to rotate through this demanding schedule of being present. This variation in your numbers and names across different tales is something mortal scholars of the far future will no doubt tie themselves in intellectual knots over. Historians still argue whether the varying number and names of the Hesperides in different myths reflect evolving regional cults and traditions associated with evening nymphs. Sheer poetic license on the part of different authors, or perhaps even a symbolic representation of the different phases of evening, specific Western stars, or the changing hues of the sunset itself. For you, it just means that occasionally, if you're lucky, you get an extra century or two off between official staring duties. The handover process itself is a masterpiece of minimalist communication, honed by endless repetition. You approach Erythea. She slowly lifts her gaze from the fascinating, unchanging cobweb. You exchange a look that conveys entire epics of shared experience. Then you might perform the traditional, very short, and almost entirely content-free hand-over hymn. A quirky little tradition you developed somewhere around the fall of the first age of man? Or was it the Bronze Age? It all blurs. It goes something like this. Sung in a haunting, close harmony. You, the apples gleam, all golden bright. Erythea. As they did through the endless night that isn't night, you Laden still sleeps a rumbling heap. Erythea, no hero's bold disturb his sleep, more's the pity. You, the twilight glows, serene and deep. Erythea, your watch is done, to rest you creep metaphorically. It's not exactly an epic, but it passes the time. And the rhymes are, you have to admit, getting quite sophisticated after so much practice. The verbal handover report is even more succinct. You might say, with a slight, graceful inclination of your head. Situation normal all beautifully. Soul-crushingly normal. No heroes, no Apple-related emergencies of any discernible magnitude. Ladan achieved a new personal best for most head snoring in perfect unison. This millennium, earlier. The big guy next door, Atlas, of course, is still holding up the sky with his usual repertoire of grunts and groans. Over to you, Erythea. Try not to have too much excitement. Or any, really, that's generally preferred by management. She will nod, her expression one of profound, timeless understanding, and you will drift away, free to pursue your off-duty activities, which are remarkably almost identical to your on-duty activities, just with slightly less focused staring at specific apples. The truth is, the view never changes. Whether it's your turn to be the primary apple sentinel or eagles or Hesperias, the scene is immutable. The golden apples glow with the same soft light. Ladan remains a mountainous, multi-headed landscape of slumber. The twilight never deepens, never brightens. The same ethereal flowers perfume the same still air. The only difference is which particular immortal, beautifully bored nymph is currently tasked with appearing marginally more alert than the others. Just in case Hera decides today is the day for one of her infamous pop quizzes on apple luminosity levels. You tried to make the shifts more interesting once. Back in a particularly listless eon, you collectively introduced Crazy Hat Century, where the nymph officially on duty had to imagine herself wearing an increasingly flamboyant and ridiculously impractical ethereal hat, described in great detail to the others. It started well, with simple sunbeam tiaras and wreaths of starlight, but escalated quickly. Hera's completely unannounced visit during what later became known as the Great Volcanic Plume of Pulsating Ostrich Feathers and Existential Regret. Hat Phase put a swift and very stern end to that particular creative innovation. Apparently. Frivolous imaginary haberdashery was not conducive to optimal Apple security. Lesson learned. So, these shifts, this rotation of duty, however pointless they may seem in a timeless, eventless garden, serve a subtle psychological function. They create an illusion of structure, a whisper of rhythm in the vast, silent opera of eternity. They give you something to anticipate your shift ending and something to nominally focus on your shift beginning. It's a fragile framework, but it's all you have. And so, as Erethia now takes her position, her gaze fixed with practiced serenity upon the glowing, unchanging fruit, you allow yourself a moment of equally practiced, serene relief. Your watch is ended, until, of course, it begins again, indistinguishable from the last, in the beautiful, boring, and utterly inescapable garden of the Hesperides. The notional shift change is complete. Your sister. Perhaps it was Aegle who just clocked on. Or maybe Arethusa. It all blurs into a beautiful, shimmering, nymph-shaped continuum after a few millennia. Has now assumed the mantle of primary staring nymph on duty. You, in turn, have gracefully transitioned into your officially off-duty but still very much in the same garden. Doing basically the same thing phase. Right. Time for some serious relaxation. You think you'll switch from intensely staring at the golden apples with an air of profound responsibility to casually observing the golden apples from a slightly different, more reclining angle, possibly while humming a thoughtful 7,000-verse ballad about the subtle aesthetic differences between apple number 37 and apple number 38. The variety in your immortal life is, as ever, simply breathtaking. You find your favorite spot, a patch of eternally springy moss nestled between the roots of an ancient, silver-leaved olive tree that has never borne an olive but looks terribly distinguished. From here, you have an excellent, if entirely unchanging, view of the main attraction Hera's golden apples. Gleaming with their soft, internal light, that golden glow, the defining feature of your world, is both a comfort and a curse. It's undeniably beautiful, a constant, gentle radiance in the perpetual twilight, but it's also a reminder of your singular, inescapable purpose. These apples, symbols of immortality, divine favor, and Hera's marital bliss, or at least her very impressive wedding gift registry, are your eternal charges. The Hesperides, as immortal nymphs intrinsically bound to this sacred garden and its precious contents, embody a timeless vigil. Their existence is without a discernible end, mirroring the perceived eternal nature of the gods they serve and the divine treasures they protect. And so, you settle in for another endless tomorrow, or more accurately, another continuation of the endless today, since tomorrow implies a progression, a change, a new set of circumstances, all of which are charmingly absent from your Hesperidian experience. You've started to suspect, after careful observation spanning several geological epochs, that tomorrow in this garden is simply yesterday wearing a slightly more optimistic, but ultimately entirely misleading, press agent smile. The sun will not rise higher, the twilight will not deepen further, the apples will remain golden, Layden will continue his multi-headed power nap, Dad will keep up his percussive groaning, and you will continue. To mark the sheer, unadulterated passage of these identical cycles, you have a small, secret, and utterly pointless ritual. Hidden beneath a particular clump of never-wilting violets, you keep a collection of perfectly smooth, identical white pebbles, gathered from the bed of the tiny, nectar-clear stream that whispers through the garden, at the end of what you arbitrarily decide constitutes a significant unit of time, perhaps a century, perhaps a millennium, perhaps just whenever the mood strikes you, you add another pebble to the pile. It's a silent, growing testament to your endless vigil, a tangible marker of intangible eons. The pile isn't very big yet, considering. Or perhaps it's unimaginably vast, and you've just lost count of how many times you've restarted it after it got too unwieldy for one nymph to manage discreetly. This tiny, quirky collection is your private acknowledgement of the vastness you inhabit. Historians still argue, in their fleeting mortal attempts to comprehend the incomprehensible nature of divine existence, whether the Hesperides, in their ultimate mythological conception, represent a state of blissful, timeless perfection and divine harmony, an idyllic pastoral dream at the world's serene edge, or if their myth subtly critiques the potential for profound stagnation, gilded ennui, and a terrifying loss of agency even within a supposed paradise, reflecting a deeper Greek philosophical concern with the necessity of purpose, change, and meaningful action. Lying here, feeling the familiar weight of another identical stretch of beautiful, apple-scented nothingness settle upon you, you could probably offer some very pointed, very experienced insights for that particular debate. Let's just say blissful perfection can wear a bit thin after the first few thousand years if it doesn't come with an option for occasional weekend getaways to a place with, say, actual weather, or squirrels that do something other than just look ethereal. You sometimes idly wonder what your divine retirement plan might entail. Should such a concept ever penetrate the Olympian bureaucracy? Probably involves more apples. You suspect? Maybe a slightly smaller, less critically important garden. Perhaps with silver apples for a change of pace. Or perhaps a highly sought-after consultancy role, Hesperidian expertise in advanced fruit security, monotony management, and coral apple inventory systems. Eon's verifiable experience. References available upon request from several very sleepy dragon heads. The thought brings a faint, ghostly smile to your lips. But for now, there is only the soft, golden glow of the eternally perfect, eternally untouchable apples, the gentle, unchanging whisper of the garden's breath, the distant rhythmic sighs of your father and your draconic colleague, and the serene, beautiful, and unending expanse of your sacred duty. You close your eyes, not to sleep in the mortal sense, but to drift once more into that timeless nymphal reverie, a state of being that is both a refuge and a reflection of your existence. Another cycle begins, or rather, the current one seamlessly continues. Your presence a silent, shimmering thread in the ancient, golden tapestry of this garden at the end of the world. The golden light of the apples, which you've watched for uncounted ages, begins to soften in your mind's eye, its familiar gleam becoming a gentle, diffused radiance. The perfect, silent garden, with its ever-present twilight and its never-changing blossoms, starts to feel more distant now, its outlines losing their sharp, immortal clarity. The sound of your sister's ethereal singing, the faint rhythmic breathing of Ladon, even the distant, sorrowful groans of Atlas, all these once constant accompaniments to your vigil begin to fade into a peaceful, encompassing silence. Let the weight of that eternal duty, the monotony of that endless watch, gently lift from your shoulders. You are no longer a Hesperid, bound to guard Hera's precious fruit at the edge of the world. The concerns of goddesses and heroes, of magical trees and hundred-headed dragons, can now recede, dissolving like mist in a sun that finally, truly, rises. Feel yourself drifting away from that ancient, enchanted place, leaving behind the beautiful, sorrowful nymphs to their timeless task. You are returning to your own world, your own time, where days have definite beginnings and endings, where seasons turn, and where change, however small, is a constant companion. The gentle, like sleepy ASMR cadence that has guided you through these ancient ponderings now deepens, softens further, urging you towards your own well-deserved rest. The story is told. The watch is ended, at least for tonight. Allow the peace of this imagined eternity, paradoxically, to bring you comfort in your own fleeting, precious, and ever-changing present. Sleep now. Sleep deeply, And may your dreams be filled with whatever new and interesting wonders your own morrow may bring.